Okay, we're going to start right on time because we have to end right on time, and we want to make sure we have some time for questions. So I always want to say this. This is ReShare. If this is not where you're supposed to be, you may get up and leave now. So we're going to talk about ReShare. I am Ann McKee. I'm a Program Officer for Resource Sharing with the Greater Western Library Alliance. We have Nora Detloff from the University of Houston and Sebastian Hammer from Index Data. And we are all members of the Project ReShare Steering Committee. So we want to talk about what Project ReShare is and why we think it's very important. Now, I'm hitting you all up to join it and give us some money. So what is ReShare? How many of you have heard about ReShare? Okay, good. For those who haven't, Sarah, we're going to fill you in on this. So it's actually a pretty exciting project. So it's a vision, it's a community, and it's a project. And I think that's what's so important. I was going to say, can you all hear me without it? But I know there might be hearing impaired people, so I'll just keep looking. So back in 2017, the Big Ten, used to be called the CIC, and now the Big Ten back again. Their resource information librarians got together to write a report on what they see the next trends are for resource sharing. And as you know, there's been a lot of, like the publishers, there's been a lot of movement in the marketplace, consolidation. So out of that report came the most important, what I believe the two important quotes are. And I'm not going to read them to you. We're going to post these up. But it was that it's fragmented. There's too many services out there. It's not based around the patron. It's based around what the librarians want the system to do. And so what can be done? So we're injecting new life into resource sharing. And I will tell you, instead of the chicken, I was going to do a syringe, and then I thought, that's probably not a very good picture to have up there. So we went with the chicken instead. It is a totally new system and a new thought of how to do Project ReShare. So we're doing this a little bit backwards because we didn't want a lot of people changing places. So I'm going to talk about the membership model first. Then it's going to be Nora and Sebastian. So we want to encourage libraries and commercial entities to get on board with us. We have a membership model, and I'm happy to talk afterwards if you want to know about the cost. It's actually very reasonable. We have a membership model that you all could give us money because it is open source. And what this is, we want this to be community owned. It's a peer-to-peer system. It's a sustainable approach and a very sustainable business approach. And what's so exciting about this is you all could pick which part of ReShare. Do you want the whole thing? Do you want just the borrowing? Do you want just something else? And because it's all open source and based on apps, you can work with it. It is platform agnostic. It is company agnostic. But we firmly believe this is going to be a very strong competitor in the marketplace. Nora will say this, but I'm going to take a little bit of her glory. We're going into alpha testing this month. So we started back in August of 2018. We met at Swarthmore trying to, what's our dream? And 15 months later, right? So I won't talk as much about how much it's going to cost. It's off the top of my head, it's $1,500 for a library we'd like a 3-year commitment, $1,500 a year. For consortia, we're doing about $1,500 per member of the consortium, and we have several consortia that are involved, and Nora will be talking about that. But I'm turning it over to Nora because those two have the meat of the presentation. So we're going to be talking about how it is community driven.
This is kind of a strange setup. Give me a minute to settle in. of bringing on some new partners, and we're very excited to welcome them into the community.
Go back to the other one. So this is the original group, and these are the steering committee members, and then we will be having a few more from the new members.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that we've organized the community, and I think Anne touched on this. It's very important to remember that ReShare is an open source software platform, resource sharing, but it's also a community. And we've worked very hard to build a foundation to build a sustainable community model upon. The core of that is the steering committee, and I will go a little bit into more depth about what all of these groups do in just a minute. We also have our product manager team, and they work on sort of refining the vision that the steering committee sets into actual product scope. We have the subject matter experts who are representatives from various institutions who are actually practitioners in the field doing the work that can talk about the workflow, the pros and cons, and kind of interface with our ideas. And then, of course, we have the developers who are the geniuses that actually build these things and do a lot of user experience testing, which I will also talk about a little more. So these are the members of our steering committee. As I said, this committee provides comprehensive oversight for the entire community and the project. We're responsible for setting the strategic roadmap, thinking about goals, allocating resources, worrying about finances. We're the group that wants your money, as Anne. So tactful. We make plans for outreach endeavors. We actually have a subcommittee that works on communication, so drafting press releases, working on the website, and so forth. And then we inform the process for the other teams. We provide feedback on the things that are coming to us. We provide direction for where they should go. Membership is representational, so founding members get a seat at the table, and they get a voting seat at the table. The product management team, as you can see, is a little bit smaller. Their responsibility is the actual internal activities of ReShare development, the building it side of things. They, as I said, manage the scope. So they sort of tell the developers which direction to go in. They choose the subject matter experts, or SMEs as we call them. And they basically just create a transparent working environment and facilitate communication between the various groups. Make a lot of decisions about what functionality is going to go into the product and what's on the roadmap for the future. Subject matter experts. As I said, these are practitioners in the field, people who really do the work and really know what's happening. Again, we're very community-driven and community-centered. We want to make sure that we are involving the people that do this work in the process of building it. They take what the product managers have proposed as features or workflows, and they really dive into the practicalities. They dissect it, they make suggestions. They have a lot of back and forth with the product management team and the SME groups and the developers. So as I said, the developers are really the brain trust, as I'm going to say. They're the group of very smart people who actually do the coding and put the product together. What I think is so interesting about ReShare and the entire process is that user experience is kind of at the core of the development process. So we start with user experience mapping and prototypes. They're vetted by the SME groups and the product management team. There's feedback before the developers dive in and actually start to write code and make things functional. So this screenshot, which I have always loved, is a really early process map that was created by our UX folks. The idea was that they would take each individual step and sort of map it, where it was happening, what was happening, and you can see all kinds of nodes taking part, and we would have huge conversations about each tiny part of this and whether or not they had gotten it right and what the roadmaps might be. Things like this map led to working prototypes and eventually to our almost functional alpha product. So it's this planning with the user experience at the heart that, again, really sets it apart. And Sebastian's going to tell you more about the development process in just a second. Oh, if you're interested in seeing any of those other products, the mock-ups, the prototypes, that URL at the bottom, which will be available online when the slides are, will link you to sort of the gallery of all of the working models thus far. Okay, this is our timeline. As you can see, we're coming to roughly the midpoint of our timeline, and we're getting ready, as Anne said, to roll out our alpha testing process, which is pretty exciting. This thing that 15 months ago we were sitting in a room talking about I wish is actually about to become a working reality, and that is amazing. We're continuing to work on our recording tools and adding functionality in consultation with our SME groups and our product management team. And we'll be working on testing and pilots all the way through fall of 2020, as you can see, and continuing that development on an ongoing basis. The project management team has started conversations around non-returnables. Thus far, all of our work has focused on the returnables workflow. So this is a slightly different animal, but that's kind of where we're headed next, even though it's not featured on the timeline. And as you can see, the community development undergirds all of this, so that is happening all the time, even as all these other processes are going on. So we're trying to sustainably grow the community, bring on new partners, beg people for money.
I'm good at that.
Okay, so why open source? An important starting concept for us, as you've probably gotten from both Anne and myself, was that the ILL community be at the heart of the product that we come up with. From the features incorporated, to the process of development, to the roadmap for the future, we're all about allowing users to take ownership of this process. And that's based both on our beliefs and on recent experiences, as Anne said, with market consolidation and choices narrowing for people that have done this work. The open structure allows that to truly happen. It's a community-driven product that we can act in a way that's responsive to the community rather than to shareholders or to other monetary forces per se. I always like to give a Green Bay Packers analogy right here. Any football fans in the audience? Okay. So I grew up a huge Cleveland Browns fan. And at one, yeah, well, yes, it continues to be a burden to bear. At one point, when Cleveland left to become the Baltimore Ravens, it was soul crushing to my entire family. And I can remember at this early developmental stage, my father holding out the model of the Green Bay Packers, which, if you don't know, is the only NFL team that's actually owned by the community of Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is also why they are the smallest market for an NFL team. It's because the people, at one point, they all bought shares in it, and the town of Green Bay owns the football team. So cheese heads will ring forever. All right, so as a completely non-techie person, I am here to tell you that open is not scary. And I think that's kind of the number one thing that I hear back from a lot of people. Open makes them very nervous. There's a frequent reference that you might hear to free kittens, meaning what you don't pay for upfront, you're going to pay for later on with cost of development and problems with things not running smoothly, and so on and so forth. So our goal with ReShare is for it to be used and integrated with existing systems and to be intuitive for practitioners, and that's why that UX design is so key to our process. Our partnership with Index Data, which you are about to hear a lot more about, means that adopters won't necessarily need a team of developers. If they want to build, if they want to innovate, if they want to take that open source code and make it better, bend it to their will, they certainly can. If they want to use it out of the box, we're going to have a team of developers who can help them do that. Speaking of developers.
Nice to see Siegfried. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Does this work okay? I'm going to try my best to talk about a couple of different things. One's a tiny bit of background on us and why open is important for us and why we are part of this community. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think ReShare interesting from an architectural and design perspective. I think Nora already hit on some of the really important points in terms of where we came from when it comes to engaging subject matter experts and users. And it's worth noting actually that Alan leads that effort. So if anyone wants to dive into that process, he's your guide. This is index data as it looked about 4 or 5 months ago, I think, except one guy who likes to sneak away when we take pictures. We've been around for about 25 years. I started it with a friend in Denmark. We started the company because we wanted to write software for libraries. And that was kind of really all we knew when we got started. And we started to release some of the software that we wrote very early on, partly because we realized that we probably never would be able to afford or really wanted to be around salespeople, and it seemed like a really easy way to get our work out there. But also because we came from an academic background, and at the time, in that environment, it felt really natural to share the work you did. A lot of the infrastructure of the internet is built up around open source software. A lot of the code that underlies everything from routers on the internet to the Macintosh computers based on open source software. So it felt really natural. But 25 years ago, there weren't a lot of people doing that, especially not in libraries. So we kind of struggled a little bit with what it meant for us to be a commercial company engaging in that kind of activity. We've heard the free kitten story and the free beer thing and all that stuff, and it always felt to me like it didn't quite hit the mark of what was really important to me about open source software. I came to realize that as we worked with other people around open source software, and sometimes around software that wasn't open, we had much better conversations when we collaborated with people around open source software. There's a way that open source software breaks down the barrier between developers and consumers of software that I became addicted to. That conversation felt so much richer than the kind of conversation that you have when you're trying to sell somebody a piece of software, especially if the medium by which you're communicating are things like RFPs and contracts and all that stuff. I really enjoyed that much more free conversation. So we did that. At the same time, I have at various times over the years, we've worked as consultants for libraries and consortia and many of the commercial vendors that come here as well. And we realized that there really was kind of a need for that more open conversation, that a lot of vendors were struggling to understand what their customers needed. It was like there are barriers that we have built up in the social relationship between vendors and libraries. We sit on opposite sides of these mechanisms of communication that are really kind of blunt instruments. And at the moment in particular, it feels like the library community or marketplace needs that deeper and more open conversation. Right? That kind of just developed over time. We enjoyed those conversations. We didn't really understand why this conversation was better than this other conversation. But about 4 years ago, we were asked by EBSCO and a group of large academic libraries to work with them on the Folio project, the Folio library service platform. And our role was basically to design the underlying architecture of the system and also to help engineer, design, and think about the community structure and what it meant for these organizations to work together. And a really interesting thing that came out of those early conversations was my realization that a big collaboration like that, unlike other projects, lots of open source projects, and this is partly why open source gets this kind of weird reputation. It's used to describe lots of different things that are built in someone's basement by a guy who then moves on or sells it to some big company, things that are built on the grant funding, and then the organizations that built the thing move on to do something else, and it just kind of sits there. Things that are built by a single library, like the Koha library management system, and then becomes over time a community property. Open source is used to describe all these different things, and people have varying and strange experiences when they actually try to engage with it. One of the things that I learned from Folio was that it really wasn't so important that Folio was an open source project. It was important that Folio was a big and notable example of a strategic collaboration that spans many different kinds of big organizations. At the time, there was, when we had this conversation, there was about 500 people working on Folio every day. And I was kind of happily talking about how everybody could show up at the party and just kind of, grab a shovel and help out. And somebody said to me, well, nobody on this project, none of these 500 people are volunteers. Everybody is here because they work for an organization that has chosen to engage in this collaboration. So I started to think about efforts like this as an open source, essentially, as a means to enable a strategic collaboration around essentially product management. And so for me, when the conversation with the consortium began around ReShare, that was what I brought in, how I thought of it. It was the means to have, essentially to establish, it was the formal model of establishing collective ownership of a product management process. And that's the most important part about ReShare from my perspective. So I wouldn't expect most people to go and download and deal with ReShare on their own. The important part of it is that everybody has equal ownership of it. There are two commercial companies that are involved in ReShare, our own and Knowledge Integration in the UK, and both of us come to it with that idea of wanting a much deeper conversation and engagement with the people that are going to be using the software. That's what makes it so awesome. So if you look at that whole governance structure of those different groups that work together on ReShare, that's what's important. It's that we have people that think about the strategic direction, that think about the larger landscape of resource sharing, that fit it into the larger context of who the stakeholders are and what their needs and worries are. We have a group of people that think about product roadmap. We have functional experts from an amazing group of different organizations, and we have developers that are working together as parts of that community. And that is what makes, I think, ReShare unique and able to respond to the needs and the challenges of the community in ways that is really difficult for a commercial product to do. So if there's kind of a reusable part of ReShare, something that could live on and could be applied in other places, it's that model of collective ownership and collaboration around product management. And I bet in particular in situations where you feel a worry about a marketplace that has gone stale, perhaps a threatening or existing monopolist situation where one company owns the entire technical infrastructure, this could potentially be an answer to that kind of threat. So when we began the work on the project, before we had a design, before we kind of knew exactly what the thing would look like in those early conversations in Swarthmore, the things that the big ideas that informed everything else in the project was this notion of putting the patron, putting the user in the center of things. If you are all familiar with how resource sharing works in practice today, there's a lot of patrons being sent back and forth between different systems and having to know way more than they should about the topology of different providers and service and working relationships between organizations and consortia. Sometimes a library might be part of two different consortia, and they have OCLC as a backup, and somehow the patron gets exposed to way too much of that stuff. We wanted to try to figure out if we could hide some of those differences, but also make these systems work together better. We felt that discovery and delivery needed to be split apart because discovery is becoming very much a way that libraries present their information landscape to their patrons. And trying to bake that deep into the particular little facet of it that's resource sharing was basically, again, forcing the patron to deal with too many different interfaces. So we knew that libraries would want to create and maintain their own discovery experience, and we didn't want to get in the way of that. So we've split apart discovery and fulfillment, even though ReShare is building the infrastructure for a shared index. We're not requiring people to use that. People can use whatever local discovery tools, whatever mechanism that they want to do discovery. Another big piece was this idea of breaking down barriers between consortia. Many of the initial members of ReShare are made up of libraries that are a part of more than one consortium. It's probably a normal case. We wanted to find a way to avoid a situation where you have to go and first see if something is available in one consortium, then the next, and so on. So we thought a lot about what would it look like to make make that experience seamless. You know, the set of consortia that a library is a member of, it's just a set of resources and affordances for the library, but it shouldn't be something that the patron is made to deal with. So getting into the architecture, just a little dive, and I'm happy to dive into this in more detail after this on the break or whatever, but I wanted to get across, I think what is a distinguishing aspect of how we're building ReShare is that it's a peer-to-peer system. So it's not a central broker that sits in the middle of a consortium and passes messages back and forth. That kind of construction has been done a lot, and it can be challenging in that construction to allow for a situation where libraries are part of more than one consortium at the same time, because who's responsible for the messaging, where does it go, and all that stuff. So ReShare is built up around the idea of nodes, we call them ReShare nodes for lack of a better term, that talk together, that exchange messages. They can be hosted together by a consortium, but they are independent nodes. And each library that has a ReShare node could use that to communicate with all kinds of other libraries. So the anatomy of a ReShare node is basically, it's made up of some infrastructure. So there's a set of low-level code that deals with managing requests, going out to other nodes and coming in from other nodes. There's a directory of lenders that this library knows about. There's an index switchboard to deal with different potential models for finding lendable copies of something. There's a switchboard for managing requests, potentially going to different systems. There's a switchboard for managing the conversation with the library's own ILS. So we can automate processes like creating temporary items in the borrowing library, creating temporary patrons, and so on. Automate that stuff so the librarian doesn't have to deal with it, and that needs to be done in different ways with different ILS. And then on top of that shared infrastructure is a set of apps. So ReShare is based on the notion of a set of apps that can be chosen by a library and then made available potentially to different staff members depending on their role. So I'll show you one or two of those apps, but basically the idea is that there's some apps that are for maintaining outgoing requests, some for incoming requests, and some apps that are more specific to very particular workflows. Where we try to optimize, for instance, the process of unpacking a box of stuff that comes in, scanning all the items that comes in, the barcodes, figuring out where they need to go, figuring out a different app for managing boxing stuff up, printing a shipping label, automating the interaction with a shipper, getting the thing off to the right place. And for each of those, we've optimized those workflows and those processes. And again, because it's based on these little apps in a platform environment that can be extended over time, other people can come in and build apps for different kinds of purposes. Maybe integration with the supply chain, maybe different kinds of local workflows that people want to optimize for. I wanted to say, just very quickly here in the last little bit of time, let me just get to the end of this. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how these ReShare nodes will talk to each other. And we made a choice that I think is really important and deserves to be emphasized and celebrated a little bit, is that the model for two ReShare nodes talking together will be based on ISO 18626. So this is an international standard that describes the structure of messages that are exchanged between interlending partners. It's a successor to a fairly dusty 30-year-old standard from ISO. This one is lightweight, it's web-based, it's JSON, XML, and stuff like that. But the idea of using a standard protocol to manage and model the exchanges of communication between two different ReShare nodes is part of our vision for making the platform truly open, and ultimately to support interoperability with other platforms. So part of the vision here is that you don't have to run the same piece of software if you want to interoperate, interlend with another library, but we can encourage people to implement the standards. So ultimately you can have somebody running ReShare in one library and somebody perhaps running something deeply integrated into Alma in another library, and they can interoperate just fine because we have a standard that we're supporting, that we're both implementing. So one of our pitches here is, if you do nothing else, it would be awesome if you went home and encouraged your vendors to support ISO 18626. There's already a kind of growing implementers community around this. I think ReShare has kicked up some interest in it. Ex-members and OCLC are both looking to join and implement this group. We're hoping certainly to push that along and to advocate for this.
Sebastian.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So the last little bit, again, as Anne already talked about, we'd love to see people come to the table. We'd love people to go home and encourage their consortia or their libraries to participate and get involved. All of those different groups that we have structured our sort of governance model into are all there for people to participate in. We'd love to see more people, representatives, more different kinds of consortia, more different kinds of libraries. So, you know, check us out and think about ReShare as a solution, but think about ways you can get involved as well, because it is awesome apart from everything else. It's really cool to be part of. So,
one more of the demo.
and if you want a demonstration while we're all here, feel free to send me an email and I can walk through some product. Do not call Anne.
Please, dear God, don't call me.
But I'm also happy to show you some of the prototypes and work through some of the thinking behind the prototypes, that the UX prototypes, and Nora can do that as well, and Alan can do that. But feel free to send me an email while we're here. And afterwards, you can also send me an email, or you can write to Kristen Wilson at Index Data, who's kind of the lead product water carrier between some of these different groups and leads the development efforts. And with that, we wanted to be sure to make some time for questions and commentary and so on.
So we have, because I forced them to, we have 10 minutes for questions. So do any of you have any kind of questions on ReShare itself, on the funding model, on anything like that? I saw Jen's hand first, and then we'll go with you, sir.
So as you've gotten consortia and libraries to participate in this, what's been the thing that excites them the most about it?
I'm going to say what I think, coming from a consortium, and then I can leave it up for those two. I think more than anything, when I've taken this back to Will and all that, is that we own it. We own all the data that right now we give other people and then have to pay to get that, information back. We own it. That's what's so exciting. So if we need something changed, we can start changing it. Now, do you two have other?
I would echo that, but I would also say that the whole development process is just such a breath of fresh air for anyone who's worked in libraries for a while and has worked with commercial vendors for technological solutions. It is a very different experience. Sort of going back and saying, I didn't really understand this, I don't understand how this works, and having a dialogue about that as opposed to like, please reference the documentation. So that people are excited about that as well.
The one thing, so I don't come from a library, but one thing that's excited me, and I think a lot of people have really gotten something out of, has been the idea of starting, not so much with architecture and code and all that stuff, but to start from the user experience and to engage people based on conversations around prototypes and wireframes, and actually to test those even before we start to write code. And that just changes the whole nature of the conversation, and it's another step away from that sort of weird RFP checkboxing kind of thing that's ambiguous and clumsy and leaves everybody dissatisfied, to something where you can have a much better conversations between subject matter experts and these UX experts. But then for developers too, getting that kind of prototype is gold, as opposed to just getting a checklist of things. It must do these 100 things.
I think it's important to know that with Gwilym, for instance, in the last 5 years, we looked into doing something. We went to a system. Almost everyone within Gwilym was on at least, if not a full implementer, at least they could loan. And 3 years later, we had to leave that system. So for us, it's a no-brainer. And I think you had a question next.
Yeah, I think this is a basic question. Is there any relationship between ReShare and Folio? If so, is Folio a prerequisite for adopting this, or?
So we chose to, because we were inspired in a way by Folio's approach to modeling out functionality into a suite of apps. We said that will be great for this. And having made that decision, it made sense actually to say, could we actually use the Folio infrastructure? So Folio is based on a platform, a set of tools for managing the back-end communication on the server and for designing the user interface that we basically took and are using for ReShare. So in a way, we're benefiting from the platform and the investment that the Folio community is making. Obviously, you don't have to run Folio to run ReShare, but if you do run Folio, you can potentially actually just take those apps that we're building and make them part of your Folio setup, which is kind of cool. But it's not a requirement, but we are using the same stack, the same set of tools.
This question doesn't come out of a functional use case, it comes out of a heavy thought about. We are in the midst of beginning discussions with the Public Library of Cincinnati, where we are as a collaboration. And one of the things I thought, well, I'm not going to say what it is, but one in this context of for resource sharing purposes, I'm very familiar with from when you started this, but I'm curious as to whether this is something that you can see as an application for even just systems that are already schlepping things within closed networks. In other words, it's not just going across libraries, across consortia, but as I just saw their new distribution center for the public library, and there are 41 different locations, and they're using Links to do most of their programming. I'm curious as to whether or not you see this as an application for the sort of large public library systems, and then those interacting on with academic as well.
What's so interesting about that, and that was a great segue, thank you. One of our newest members is the Alberta Library Consortium, and it's a multi-tier. They have public libraries, they have school libraries. So yes, we do see that, and we're excited now that we have someone that we can start working with. I'm sure they have more in-depth knowledge. But.
One is simple one. How is it different from OCLC model?
Okay.
Second, the resource sharing is a transaction management system in every library, in a functional management system. So ideally, it should be part of IRS. Now, since you are building this an independent platform only for resource sharing, how are the libraries going to conduct or integrate with their own local library management system, IRS?
So if you didn't hear the question, it was a two-part question. How is this related or like OCLC? And also then, how does this work with your local ILS system?
Yep.
You can do
So I'll take the second part anyway. I think so. So it's true that it sits. ReShare can potentially sit as a separate system for an ILS that doesn't have built-in support for resource sharing. Everything in ReShare is based on APIs. So a vendor that was interested could integrate ReShare fully into its set of workflows. As it is, there's kind of a one-way integration where ReShare can do certain things in the ILS. It can create temporary items. It can use the ILS for authentication, but it's not at all impossible to think of an ILS that is missing a deep resource sharing system to actually just use ReShare and put their own skin on it, integrated into the platform. But that's the main. I mean, in an ideal world, it would be great to see ReShare completely integrated in the ILS, and I think that's part of the value of using open standards, that somebody could, they could use our code, but they could also build a system based on ISO 18626 and interoperate with other people that are running ReShare.
The beauty of that is that the way that we built it is that you can get the benefit of ReShare interacting with your ILS, again, in that one-way exchange, regardless of what ILS system you have. It's, as Ann said, it's completely platform agnostic. So if you're running OCLC WorldShare, if you're running Alma, if you're running Sierra or Millennium, God help you, then you're going to be able to utilize the system.
But it requires that the ILS be capable of interacting via APIs. So if you're on Sierra, for example, you cannot create an item record via API, Sierra cannot interact with this.
Right. Your workflows become trickier if the system just outright doesn't support
Yeah.
APIs or will not integrate at all. A lot of them will just support APIs and even some standard protocols to support a lot of these things, but yeah, there are ILSs that are particularly difficult to work with. So I don't know that we can swear that every single ILS will support all these functions.
Apologies.
So
Non-techie person
for those
person.
libraries, some workflows might actually require some, in worst case, double entry or some hopping back and forth between
But
systems.
to Sebastian's point, the more that an ILS actually complies to an NCIP standard or something, this is all about standards.
Yeah.
It's the more standards compliant you are, the more facile you can be to move requests from node to node or from node to other vendor. It could easily go to Rapid if it's talking 262. It doesn't necessarily have to be a reshare node. So the point is thinking about this as much as a marketplace as much as it is a network of 1866 nodes.
Other questions? We have time for one more.
Do we make the checks out to you personally, Ann?
No, not to me personally, but I'm happy to take them. I am happy if you want to come up. We just didn't have, you saw us run through. We didn't have enough time to really talk about the whole membership model. I am happy to talk with it. Jill Palsy. Jill Morris is the executive director of Palsy. Actually, that's a good name for you. Palsy is going to be our alpha tester. And so you can come up and ask either one of us about the whole funding model. But we want your money, but we also want your time. We want your dedication. If you can't do anything else but give us some programming time, we are happy to do that too.
I wanted to add one little tangent to, I think, a question that you asked, Brad, in terms of sort of other applications of the software, things you might use it for. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about the ReShare community and this kind of model is that the steering committee, the strategy group, is a big part of the conversation we have is where else might we apply this? What can you do if you have a shared index? What can you do if you have infrastructure for moving things back and forth between two systems and so on? So we talk about things like shared print facilities and print retention models. We talk about things like integration with the supply chain, things we might do like digital lending of scan books or of electronic subscriptions, all these different things that we might explore based on this platform and with the community as our expert.
So we're out of time, but I just wanted to take the last second to say we really believe how we did ReShare and how we are doing ReShare really can be replicated in other projects. I really urge you to find out more about it and then take it and figure out how you might be able to do what we've been able to do in anything else. So thank you all so much for coming. Take care.